Kupiansk is a frontline city, and most people expect danger from artillery and drones overhead. But this time, the threat is described as coming from below, through hidden spaces that once felt safe. Russian assault troops are accused of probing the rear using underground infrastructure near the city's approaches. If that route works, an ordinary apartment block stops being sheltered and turns into a launch point. Ukraine is not only defending streets because it is fighting for control of basements, stairwells, and the few seconds before an ambush locks in. This is urban war where a stopped vehicle becomes a beacon, and one building can pull in armor, FPV drones, and demolition charges. What matters is not a flag on a roof, but who controls the rhythm of entry, detection, and removal inside the city grid. When that rhythm breaks, supply lines and morale can crack with it. Like, share, and subscribe to Military Force for more clear reporting on modern weapons and real battles. Now follow the sequence because the first moves set the trap for everything that comes next. Russia's pipeline move around Kupiansk matters because it aims at the one thing every defense needs, which is a stable rear. Instead of crossing open ground and getting tracked by drones, small assault teams are described as slipping through underground pipes so they can surface where guards do not expect pressure. The logic is simple. A river line forces predictable crossings, but a pipe can turn that barrier into a shortcut, and that is why the tactic is attractive even if it is risky. Moving underground also has limits, because light is poor, space is tight, and radio links can fail inside long metal tubes. Troops must carry less, move slower, and stay quiet, so one mistake can trap them before a single shot is fired. That is why the exit point matters more than the tunnel itself. Once troops surface near a housing block, the goal is not to take the city in one rush. The goal is to grab rooms that offer angles, because a multi-story building provides sightlines, firing positions, and a place to hide from direct fire while friends move in behind. In city fighting, that kind of foothold can shape the map without changing it, since it lets a small group threaten roads, alleys, and courtyards that other units must use. It is the same logic as planting a thorn, because the defender cannot ignore it and cannot solve it from far away. This is where politics and military reality meet. A rear area that suddenly takes fire can shake public confidence and force commanders to spend scarce units on cleanup, even if the front line has not shifted by a mile. That is why defenders try to shut these routes down early. They can damage or flood pipes, block sections with obstacles, and watch remaining access points like a target, because a pipe is only useful when it is unobserved. If surveillance catches movement at the wrong moment, an infiltration stops being a surprise and turns into a trap. The broader picture is that Kupiansk has been contested hard enough that even small penetrations can be amplified for morale on both sides. That creates pressure for quick, visible responses, and it rewards the side that can clear a threat fast without bleeding vehicles and people in the process. So the pipeline story is really an opening move. It tries to create a sudden inside presence that forces Ukraine to fight at arm's length in stairwells and basements. And once that presence is spotted, the fight stops being about routes under the ground and becomes about who can clear buildings first under fire. Ukraine's CQB response matters because it denies Russia the one thing an urban raid needs: time to settle. The moment a foothold is spotted, assault teams move in tight, because a few minutes can turn a cell into a layered threat. In the transcript, the entry is fast and simple, because grenades go first, then boots follow in one surge, with drones often watching overhead. Corners, doorways, and hallways become the whole map, and the fight is decided by who clears them without pausing. That speed is planned because it blocks the enemy from building a routine indoors. The core method is pressure, because CQB is meant to break control before it forms. A team closes distance, uses a grenade to shock the room, and then pushes through the doorway while rifles cover angles. Fire is aimed at likely hiding spots, since furniture, stair rails, and broken walls can hide a shooter for 1 second too long. Inside the stack, simple signals matter, because shouting gives away timing and spreads panic. A leader points, taps shoulders, and sets direction, so the group moves together and does not split. The point is to take away choices, because hesitation gives an infiltrator time to move, reload, or call for help. When the clearing rhythm stays clean, a building stops being a fortress and becomes a trap for whoever entered first. This is also a race against reinforcement, because one held apartment can pull in drones, ATGM crews, and indirect fire. If Russian troops survive the first sweep, they can spread into nearby houses, mark routes for FPV pilots, and create crossfire that locks streets. That is why Ukrainian units try to reset the area immediately, so the enemy cannot turn civilian structures into a chain of cover. In practical terms, clearing one building is less important than stopping the pattern from jumping to the next door. This is where tempo becomes a weapon, and it sets up the vehicle fight that follows. CQB in a city also carries a political signal, because it shows the defender can still act with discipline under stress. Urban residents and rear units watch whether a surprise penetration becomes chaos or gets contained quickly. A fast clearance says the command system is still working, even when the threat appears in the wrong place. It also protects logistics in the short term, because supply runs depend on streets that cannot be left under unknown control. If the defender looks slow, the attacker gains confidence and the information war gains fuel at the same time. So every cleared stairwell is also a message, and that message leads straight into the problem of getting troops in and out alive. In close combat, grenades and rifles do most of the work, but they cannot solve the extraction problem alone. A team can win a room and still get pinned outside, because windows, rooftops, and side alleys create deadly angles. That is why CQB is paired with quick movement and cover, since the moment outside the doorway is often the worst moment. When the exit is delayed, the cleared building becomes irrelevant, because the unit's survival and morale become the real objective. This is the hinge point where armor and drones enter the story, because the city does not forgive slow withdrawals. Armored vehicles in Kupiansk matter here because they act like moving doors, and the fight can flip the instant one door gets stuck. In this kind of urban pocket, a Humvee or a Bradley is not just transport, because it is a shield, a radio node, and a timed escape plan for infantry operating under constant observation. The transcript shows these vehicles driving into narrow lanes and private housing blocks, where walls cut sightlines and every stop becomes a risk decision. A crew is trying to do two jobs at once, because it must move fast enough to avoid being tracked, yet slow enough to pick up troops without creating chaos. That tension is where the story starts to tighten, because survival depends on a clean extraction as much as a successful entry. The pressure builds toward a single moment, and that moment is the vehicle that cannot move. A Humvee comes under fire from Russian infantry that has penetrated buildings, and the vehicle is damaged enough that it stops in place. Once the wheels stop, the scene changes, because a parked armored truck becomes a fixed landmark that drones can find again and again. The infantry dismounts and tries to form a quick perimeter, but the timeline is already working against them, since the enemy now has time to aim, adjust, and coordinate. Then a Russian drone drops a grenade, and the Humvee is destroyed, which turns an ordinary pickup point into a burning signal that draws more danger. This is the kind of loss that forces a commander's hand, because leaving people exposed is not an option when the air is watching. That is why the radio call for help arrives fast, and it pulls heavier armor into the same narrow space. A Bradley rushes in to assist, and that entrance shows why tracked vehicles are used as armored taxis in modern city fighting. The Bradley brings thicker protection and stronger firepower, so it can cover a street while soldiers move, yet that strength also comes with a blind spot. The transcript highlights that Russian assault troops are inside a nearby building, while the Bradley crew does not know it. And that gap in information is the opening Russia wants. Russian troops fire an ATGM at the rear of the Bradley and miss, which is a reminder that one shot can decide the whole rescue, even if it fails. The Bradley still pushes into the sector, fires to suppress likely positions, and creates a short bubble where Ukrainian troops can breathe and move. That bubble is never comfortable, though, because every second spent loading troops is another second for the enemy to build a strike. Russian observers coordinate FPV operators once they see the extraction begin, because FPV drones are built for the moment when targets are slow and predictable. A drone attack misses, and Bradley manages to evacuate the soldiers, but the key detail is not the miss itself, it is the attempt at timing. Russia is trying to hit the thin seam between vehicle arrives and vehicle leaves, since that seam is where armor cannot fully protect dismounting troops. Ukraine is trying to shrink that seam to almost nothing, because a clean withdrawal keeps the unit intact and preserves momentum for the next action. This is why even a failed FPV run still matters, because it forces faster movement, tighter spacing, and harsher choices about who boards first. The rescue becomes a test of discipline, and that test continues when another vehicle arrives to pull out the remaining group. An additional armored vehicle, described as an M17 in the transcript, moves in to extract those left behind, and it takes damage while completing the pickup. That detail signals how costly the last load can be, because the enemy has already marked the zone and adjusted fire patterns around it. The vehicle returns to base damaged, which means the mission is counted as a save, but the fleet pays a hidden bill in repairs and reduced readiness. This is the quiet math behind urban fighting, because each trip is not only about bullets today, it is also about how many working vehicles remain tomorrow. It also shows why both sides obsess over immobilization, since a stopped platform becomes a target that invites drones, rockets, and indirect fire. So the real escalation is not noise or smoke, it is the shift from movement to fixation, and that shift is what forces Ukraine to consider harder methods. When extraction stays dangerous and enemy troops keep sheltering inside strong buildings, the logic moves toward demolition, because removing the hiding place can be safer than trading rescues forever. The fight escalates when Ukraine chooses demolition, because a dug-in squad inside a solid block can stall an entire sector. Instead of trading shots at windows, engineers drive up with a charge, move it into the basement, and back out before the timer runs down. The blast does not need to flatten the whole structure, because even a partial collapse can crush firing angles, block stairwells, and bury escape routes. When a shelter turns into rubble, the defenders lose their map in seconds, and that shock forces either a retreat or a fast surrender. That decision pushes the battle from clear the rooms to remove the stronghold, and it sets the tone for everything around it. A collapsed section also breaks command and control, because small groups inside cannot see each other, cannot pass signals, and cannot trust the routes they used minutes earlier. Dust, broken walls, and twisted stairs cut lines of sight, so crossfire becomes harder to coordinate and friendly movement becomes risky. Even if some soldiers survive the blast, they may be pinned in pockets with no clean exit, which turns time into an enemy. From there, the fight shifts outward, because the safest way to finish a shaken unit is to seal the edges and squeeze. The transcript describes several Ukrainian groups moving with different tasks, so one element draws fire while another slips around the flank. A third push heads toward an industrial zone, which matters because warehouses offer long corridors, wide yards, and cover that can hide a breakout. As these lines tighten, the goal is not to storm every doorway, because the goal is to deny the opponent a path to regroup. In tight streets, one surviving shooter can freeze movement and reset the fight. That encirclement logic works only when timing holds, and that timing is tested the moment artillery starts to speak. Russian guns begin a heavy barrage and adjust to disrupt the pincer, because indirect fire can split a coordinated sweep into isolated fights. Ukrainian commanders answer with their own coordination, since a circle collapses if one group pauses too long under shell shock. The danger is not only the blast radius, because fragments and shock waves force troops to hug walls, lose hearing, and miss short-range cues. Under that pressure, leaders rely on simple orders, short movements, and quick checks at corners, because hesitation invites a direct hit. That is how artillery turns a clean plan into a survival drill, and it explains why control of tempo stays central. There is also a deeper layer to this escalation, because stopping infiltration means treating underground routes as a battlefield feature, not a background detail. Business Insider has reported that Ukrainian forces have damaged, flooded, or monitored pipelines in the area to block repeat entries. That kind of denial is slow work, Yet it matters, because a single unguarded line can restart the cycle with a new team and a new surprise point. So the demolition is not just anger, because it is part of a wider effort to close doors, remove safe rooms, and keep the rear from turning into a trap. Once the squeeze is in place and the routes are watched, the end of the clash becomes a chase, and anything trying to leave becomes the last target. The end of this raid matters because the last minutes are where an attacker either saves hardware or leaves proof behind. When Ukraine tightens the area and the pressure rises, the fight stops looking like a room-clearing problem and starts looking like a withdrawal problem. A unit that cannot hold a block will try to pull people and gear out fast, and that move creates targets that are easier to read than hidden shooters. That shift is why the finale often happens on the road, not inside the building. Those exit routes are where this story turns from survival to capture of momentum. In the transcript, Ukrainian troops meet a Russian cargo vehicle and they hit it with grenade launchers. The moment it catches fire, the commander assumes ammunition is burning and orders an immediate pullback. That order is not cowardice because a secondary blast can kill trained troops faster than any rifle. It is also a way to avoid becoming a fixed point, since lingering beside a burning wreck invites artillery correction and drone strikes. When the group waits only long enough to reduce the danger and then moves again, the message is clear about priorities. That same caution shapes what happens when the road produces another contact. Further along, Ukrainian forces run into a second haul truck, and there is an escort vehicle with it. Both are engaged with grenade launchers, which signals that the target is not armor, but the logistics layer that keeps a foothold alive. As they move closer, they confirm the Russians were trying to evacuate part of their equipment from those vehicles. That detail matters because it shows the opponent is not only retreating, it is trying to preserve capability for the next attempt. When a convoy shifts from holding ground to saving kit, it also reveals that the local plan has failed. That failure is the window Ukraine tries to widen. The practical value of hitting transport is simple, because a stranded unit loses more than metal. It loses radios, spare batteries, medical packs, and the small items that make a second push possible. It also loses the confidence that a safe route exists, which can slow every future move in that sector. Even if some soldiers escape on foot, heavy items do not, and those losses show up later as weaker attacks and shorter endurance. This is why late-phase strikes on vehicles can matter more than a flashy entry at the start. That logic ties the road fight back to the building fight without repeating it. The order to withdraw early also says something about Ukrainian command culture in urban war. A unit can win contact and still lose the day if it gets caught by blast, fragmentation, or a fast artillery adjustment. So the commander treats time near burning vehicles as toxic, and he trades a few seconds of curiosity for a higher chance of keeping the team intact. That kind of decision protects future missions, because experienced troops are harder to replace than a single chance to inspect a wreck. It is a cold calculation, and it often separates a clean raid from a messy one. That calculation leads directly to what this action means and what it does not mean. At the tactical level, the sequence reads like a successful raid, because Ukraine disrupts a foothold and then punishes the exit. It prevents Russian assault elements from turning a brief penetration into a stable pocket that can expand across nearby blocks. It also shows that once Russian teams are detected, they can be forced into reactive movement where trucks and escorts become liabilities. Yet it is not a decisive battle for the whole front, because Kupiansk remains contested and both sides can attempt similar patterns along other lines. A disrupted push today does not erase the next one, and that reality keeps the pressure on. That is why the real question shifts away from one burning vehicle and toward who controls the city's doors, above and below, when the next cycle begins. This clash is not only about CQB or one destroyed Humvee, because it exposes a weak spot in modern urban warfare that many people still underestimate. If Russia can slip through pipelines and surface behind the line, then a city stops being a natural shield and starts acting like a maze with hidden doors. Ukraine's answer shows a different logic, because assault teams, armored extraction, and demolition turn the mission from push them back into deny them the ability to stay. Kupiansk becomes a real stress test, since drones can watch, ATGM and FPV teams can strike, and artillery can reshape streets within minutes. The cycle can repeat, because underground routes do not disappear on their own, and one unsealed line can invite the next attempt. At the same time, even the question of how much of Kupiansk is controlled can turn into a public dispute, so small actions may be amplified or blurred for information goals. The open question stays sharp. Can Ukraine lock these hidden doors fast enough? Or will Russia turn them into a standard play once it learns what failed and what worked? Like, share, and subscribe to Military Force for more clear reporting on modern weapons, real battles, and the politics behind them.